Good morning, good morning, beautiful people. As always, this is a day that the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it. As always, God is good, and He is good all the time. Now, we got to do a video like this. Right? I have to show y'all what's going on, right? So a lot of people don't know the history of the police, in the United States, policing in general. However, more tailored to, since I live in motherfucking United States, we're going to talk about the policing in the United States. Although policing in the United States is almost reflective of what you could see globally. Yes, policing in some countries look different. However, the policing, when you look at the United States, Australia, UK, the English people, it's pretty much identical. I mean, a lot of people don't even know that the United States actually imitated the policing in other communities. They pulled, ideas from the Romans. They pulled ideas, especially from the motherfucking British. I mean, if you don't know about the colonialism of the United States, don't fret, because I have a video coming up about that as well. Because we have a lot of very ignorant people out here. And that's what this channel is about, educating. See, a lot of this information I've learned over my years, in my education. So, and I know a lot of this stuff I wouldn't have even known if I didn't spend 6 years in college pursuing degrees in criminal justice. And so I figure, instead of boring y'all with, trying to teach y'all by my mouth, you know what I'm saying? Motherfucking mimicking what you will see in a college, classroom. I go out and I look for material that is a bit more easier to digest than, sitting here listening to me talk all day. So, but best believe we're going to have some fine tuning content coming in, because there is some things that aren't, included in some of this, these videos that I be sharing with y'all. And I feel like some of this information is very pertinent. However, I want y'all to know about the history of the policing in the United States, right? Because a lot of people just don't know. I mean, when you think about colonial America, just to, give you a little synopsis, the United States of America was created by runaway motherfucking British folks, okay? It's British folks that was like, I don't like the oppression, the oppression that I am getting from the kings and the queens and, these folks here. So I'm going to flock to some new land and create our own, free country, right? But not only is the United States, founding fathers, a bunch of runaway British, but a lot of them are what they call motherfreaking vagabonds, right? Vagabonds. These are people who they call, froward. They walking around senselessly, they consider them criminal because they're in between jobs. These are people who have no job. So they're almost like, castaways, street people, the people that people ignore out here, homeless, drug addicts. They're people that don't fit into the legitimate realm of the world, right? These are the people that created this, America, but also our police. So I just want y'all to have that idea, okay? Have that idea. We're going to get into this video right now because I've already talked for a little too long. So let's go.
A New York Times article published in August of 2020 notes that confidence in law enforcement is at a record low, while calls for change have reached a fever pitch in the public consciousness. Ongoing protests erupted across the United States, with international actions arising in solidarity. Videos posted on social media sites reveal what citizen protesters see as enduring law enforcement violence and extrajudicial killings of people in Black, brown, and impoverished communities. In some camps, people have started to dismiss bad apple arguments that frame law enforcement abuses as individual aberrations. Instead, they point to historical precedents that are embedded in the very foundations of the institution of policing. Rather than reforms like chokehold bans or body cameras, activists and organizers suggest that defunding, or even abolition of the institution of policing, is the only way to prevent future violence and death. It may be hard to imagine a world without police, but all it takes is a little historical digging to see that they haven't been around forever, and this isn't the first time there's been a demand for police reform of some kind. So today we're going to look at policing, from its colonial...
I just want the record to be known, because it's funny that she said this isn't the first time that the police has been restructured. Remember when I told you that colonial America was founded by runaways from, Great Britain, the British, but also vagabonds, right? But if you think about it, a lot of the people that was filling up colonial America were also criminals that were being exiled from British. These are the same people who made up our police force. See, the police force, originally, when it first came about, it was called Night Watch. And Night Watch, you could be, you can volunteer to be Night Watch, which basically, it's not like how it is now where the United States population is about 340 million people. Back then, during colonial American times, it was probably more closer to like maybe 100,000, people here. And this is groups, and that's being generous. The population was very small. So Night Watch was plausible, where you had this one volunteer who his jurisdiction was this area, right? This community. And he had, this little section that he controlled, and that's how they did it, right? You can volunteer to do this, where you call in, hey, there's a fire going on, there's some criminal activity, and you're alerting the media type of thing, right? And then it kind of transitioned, into being, well, we don't get as many volunteers, so let's make this a punishment. So now this thief, this, who knows, rapist, this criminal is now given the ability to police or be on night watch as their form of punishment. There was a lot of raggedy stuff going around with the beginning of the police. So that's why there was a lot of restructuring. They went from a decentralized aspect to a more centralized aspect. That's why there's all these channels and departments and jurisdictions, and they tried to make it more organized. But as we see, don't really seem to be helping.
Origins to the modern day, as well as attempts to change the institution over time. In the early American colonies, policing was neither centralized nor standardized. Groups of night watchmen and patrols often worked under a hodgepodge of different systems depending on their geographical locations. Their aims were fairly similar, as property owners and private companies contracted people for hire as protection from thieves and ne'er-do-wells. In a bitterly ironic twist, colonial settlers were especially paranoid that nearby displaced indigenous peoples might encroach on their settlements. Between the 1630s and 1700, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia implemented night watch systems that mostly relied on volunteers, though some were paid. These people would sign up for dates and times to patrol, often sent to make sure locals were neither gambling nor engaging in sex work-related activities. This system was extremely inefficient, as night watch also served as punishment for some people, tempting volunteers to participate in the vices they were meant to watch. Frequently, these night watchmen spent their shifts getting drunk and falling asleep while on duty.
It's kind of like the police now, where you see them hanging out at Dunkin' Donuts, trying to solicit freebies, even though that's unethical and in some places illegal.
Southern colonies focused on protecting other forms of property. Priorities rested on the
This is why Black people historically do not like cops. For those out there what's your problem with white people? What's your problem with cops? White people made up the police, whose job was literally to ensure that Black people remained enslaved.
Maintenance of human chattel. Enslaved Africans upholding colonial economies. The first American slave patrols were formed in the first decade of the 18th century in the Carolinas. These groups of 3 to 6 patrolmen often traveled on horseback, carrying whips, ropes, and guns. Enslavement led to the enactment of slave codes that patrols enforced. Night watches in the northern colonies had similar duties. Though chattel enslavement was less practiced there, these watches were still tasked with controlling enslaved populations.
I just want to say, you see how historically the police policed the drunks, the poor, the racial minorities. And then fast forward to 2022, we still see them doing what? Fighting blue-collar crime, where they harass people who stand on corners for loitering. Motherfreaking arresting people, holding people in incarceration for not being able to pay DMV traffic infractions. Motherfreaking DMV fees. Ain't nothing changed except the police went from being not paid or paid very little to a lot of times these niggas are getting paid better than teachers. And they're nothing but gatekeepers into the criminal justice system. Let go.
Connecticut and New York even passed slave laws that served the same function. These laws criminalized attempts at escape and rebellions of the enslaved against their enslavers. Over the next 100 years, night watches, for-profit hires, and slave patrols worked in pursuit of similar ends by different means. The notion of a centralized municipal police force actually originated in the UK by way of economist Patrick Colquhoun and his treatise on the police of the metropolis. Influenced by ideas from the Scottish Enlightenment, Colquhoun's treatise has been credited with reforming night watches into a means of maintaining social order. Rather than just surveilling crimes, they would discipline labor. These reforms required prioritization of moral reform for members of the lower classes in rapidly urbanizing areas. Members of the middle and upper classes welcomed this new development, while everyone else resisted.
Do you see why people say the police are nothing but motherfucking asset protection? They protect the property of the wealthy, of the rich. They don't give a damn about us. That is why when you call the police against illegal activities, the opposite direction. See, there's this thing, right? Donald Black, he calls it his theory of law. And it's that policing, it doesn't go up, but it only comes down, right? So me as a homeowner, you know, semi-wealthy class, but we're on the bottom end, very, very bottom end, right? But me as a homeowner, a person who has an educational background, you know, who has some stock and whatnot, in this jacked up world, right? I can call against a poor person who's a renter, you know what I'm saying? I drive a Lexus, a 2016. This person could potentially drive a Honda 2005, raggedy and beat, you know? And if I called the cops on this person, the police will work in my favor. Why? Because I look more prestigious. My status is higher than this other person. Now, it's a little weird when you bring in race, because even with all of this status and accolades and accomplishments, my black skin hinders me a lot in these spaces, even coming up against poor white people, right? But ideally, because of my accolades, accomplishments, I have a master's, all up to a master's in criminal justice. I motherfucker own my house. You know, I'm not considered under the poverty line. You know, I actually got some leeway in this world. So law will work on my behalf if I called against someone who is viewed as inferior to me. But someone who is viewed as inferior to me tries to call the police on me, say, hey, she's harassing me, this, that, and the third. All I got to do is flaunt my accomplishments and accolades, especially if they're another racial minority, and their claims, their complaints will be dismissed. This is the raggediness of this motherfucking day and age.
Regardless of this resistance, municipal police forces started to form in the late 1820s. These new ideas gained traction and spread internationally. Across the pond, American cities began instituting municipal police forces, one of which was founded in Boston in 1838. Increasing urbanization and immigration from places like Germany and Ireland meant that people perceived older methods of social control as insufficient. That many of these immigrants were Catholic further marked them as dangerous others. Communities of freed Black people in northern states were not policed or detained as frequently, except when moving outside of the boundaries of their segregated sections of the city. Police were also asked to watch for potential threats of labor activity. Violence between police and striking workers, even if instigated or propagated by the police, could be framed as less a matter of private interest disciplining laborers than a force for public good curbing riots and maintaining order. By the 1850s, police corruption became rampant. Like their night watch predecessors, members would often break the law, like soliciting sex workers, gambling, and public drunkenness. Being in such close...
This is also seen today. All you got to do is Google. I live in Rochester, New York. All of the surrounding police departments of us has had motherfreaking all types of scandals from them. Abuse of power, soliciting people into sex, all types of wild stuff. I mean, so bad that they're coercing people to work on their side, to be their informant, their snitch, and with threats of being, reincarcerated. And then they work in there these little illegal favors like sex or drugs, money. Man, ain't much change. And it's 2022.
Proximity to these types of activities left members of the police vulnerable to bribes. Leaders of the municipal party machines would choose police captains and sergeants and even use the police to harass political opponents. Municipalities eventually allowed police forces to carry weapons because they had already begun to do so. Local denizens feared the police and faced the brunt of these often corrupt and newly armed groups. Meanwhile, in the South, patrols continued to enforce slave codes, which required even average citizens to maintain vigilance. Fugitive enslaved people remained the responsibility of patrolmen, but deputized the average citizen. While the U.S. Civil War left this system of enslavement, as well as the laws and enforcers that upheld it, nominally conquered, this sympathetic relationship between official patrollers and vigilant citizens continued as the institution of policing in the southern United States came to look more like that of the North. In the post-Civil War era, slave codes gave way to black codes. These laws controlled where formerly enslaved people could go, where they could work and live, where they could travel, and even how much they could be paid. Instead of disbanding, patrolmen shifted their focus, arresting freed black people, including children, on minor charges as a way of incorporating them into systems of servitude.
The youngest kid to have ever been sentenced to death row was a black kid, and if I'm not mistaken, he was under the age of 14. Black kid.
Like the convict leasing system. Prisons could then lease their detainees to private companies through convict leasing and tenant farming systems, or crop liens, which...
The 13th Amendment made this possible, where enslavement is legal as long as it is used as corporal punishment.
Helped keep black, newly minted citizens indebted to their former enslavers. Like the slave codes, the black codes legitimized white supremacist extrajudicial vigilantism and anti-black violence. They also paved the way for the Jim Crow era. Lynch mobs and vigilante groups were common throughout the United States, often with implicit or explicit blessings from local police officers. To learn more about this history, you can watch our videos on why do we have private prisons and the racist origins of US law. By 1900, police work faced more reforms, not because of the racial animosity or vigilantism, but because police were often repeating the behaviors of their night watch predecessors by participating in illicit activities or accepting bribes for favors. Around this time, August Vollmer emerged as an influential figure who both advocated for progressive reforms and encouraged more systematic study of policing. Vollmer served as a police chief in Berkeley, California, and founded an early department of criminology as a professor at UC Berkeley. He envisioned and enacted a new policing system that soon spread from police precincts in California throughout the United States. Police were required to attend college. Their work duties often involved elements of psychology, management, social work, and sociology. But a new era of policing was on the horizon. In 1919, the passage of the 18th Amendment prohibited the manufacture and sale of alcohol, which created a vacuum for organized crime to fill. In 1929, President Herbert Hoover appointed the Wickersham Commission. Its main duty was to examine problems with law enforcement. Over the next 2 years, the commission produced 14 volumes on their findings. One volume, entitled Lawlessness and Law Enforcement, documented widespread corruption, while another volume, The Police, led to a bevy of reforms for law enforcement across the country, such as remapping of police precincts in order to reduce the chance of political pressure, increasing standards in order to recruit higher quality officers, reducing the duties of officers, updating technologies for ease of information gathering, and diversification of police officers from different races and familiar with immigrant language, habits, custom, and cultural background. Throughout the 1950s, professionalism became a priority. Police officer and author Orlando Winfield Wilson gained widespread influence on American policing. His book, Police Administration, in many ways served as the blueprint for reforms to improve police effectiveness and again change the institution of policing. Professionalism became the goal, marking an effort to consolidate and centralize in order to maintain order and prevent corruption within these organizations. Working as a police officer became a career trajectory, which was a relatively new phenomenon. In The Police in America, an introduction, historian Samuel Walker claims the mid-century shift towards
I read that book in my undergrad.
professionalization had unintended consequences for police departments across the United States. Bureaucratization, centralization of authority, and installation of a quasi-militaristic ranking system changed the inner workings of departments, allowing them to turn inward and become more disconnected from the public. New stop and frisk methods further antagonized community members, often young, male, and minority.
It's funny she mentioned that, because I want to put this out there. Because a lot of people have this misconception that black and brown people, especially black folk, but black and brown people are so criminalized and they have all this illegal contraband on them. Well, a study in 2017 that had looked at the stop and frisk data surrounding NYPD, and they found that although black and Latino people are disproportionately stopped and frisked compared to white people, so that means black and brown people are stopped way more than white people, despite their numbers to the population. So remember, there's about 330 million people, 340 million people in the United States. Of that, 60% of them are white. So over 100 million of the United States residents are white. They identify as white. White. Not Australian, not no Italian, not no Irish, white. Okay, it's all inclusion. Black people make up 13% of the U.S. population. Latinos make up slightly less than that, although they have an ever increasing population, and they're expected to outnumber black folks in the next couple of years, and even expected to outnumber white folks by 2020, or excuse me, by 20, I believe it's 2030 or 2050. But either way, they're expected to outnumber white folks. But with this information, right? So even though in New York City, there's way more white people that lives there than there are racial minorities. Racial minorities are stopped and they're frisked way more than white people, right? But despite this, illegal contraband, which includes drug paraphernalia, as well as handguns that they're not licensed to carry. In New York State, you are required to have a license to carry concealed, right? Drugs and illegal handguns were found on more white people. More drugs and illegal handguns were found in those white people than the black people, even though less white people were stopped and frisked compared to black people and brown people. Now make that make sense. If you got 500 people, right, and you only stop 100 white people and the rest 400 people, you got 200 blacks, 200 Latinos, right? Out of that 500 people, you got white people 100, black and browns 400 people. Those 400 black and brown people that were stopped were found to have less contraband illegal contraband on them than the small amount of white people, the 100. With that being said, it has not only proven that there is some correlation with, bias policing, racial profiling, and all this wonderful jazz, right? It still goes to show that Black people, despite the criminal activity that is not shown, Black and brown people are still stopped, they're still arrested, they're still harassed way more than white people, even though white people they're committing more crimes, which makes sense because the amount of your crimes is it's related to your population. White people outnumber everybody here. So of course there's going to be more white criminals than anybody else, but nobody wants to pay attention to the white criminals. You only want to look at the color ones. It's crazy, right?
Who felt the brunt of unwarranted encounters and conflict with the local police. These communities, especially impoverished and/or minority, felt that this model encouraged police repression. The long-standing concerns of Black citizens began to take center stage in the 1960s. Tired of racial harassment and terror, they challenged not only laws, but law enforcement in efforts to gain equal civil rights footing and bring their struggles into the public purview. Despite some advancements in the civil rights movement, this combination of disconnect and antagonism grew through the 1970s as the benefits of public employee unionization offered new rights for police departments. Despite the power to make more demands, local politicians were able to use municipal fiscal crises and mismanagement to create scapegoats out of police unions. Police departments often use tactics familiar to labor organizers to help them leverage demands. Blue flus, or in other words, unofficial worker strikes, disguised as uncoordinated sick days and work slowdowns, grew in number throughout the 1970s and 80s. Instead of acquiescing, local city officials would counter these tactics with budget cuts. Police departments were further reduced in number and went through a period of what's known as tailorization. Duties became highly specialized and fragmented, causing officers to relinquish some of them to other public employees. There were unintended consequences, though. Efficiency was reduced in many departments, which led to further disconnect between police departments and the public. Today, anyone with a smartphone can now document violent and often racialized encounters with the police, which has reshaped notions of public vigilance and raised concerns about how the police should fit into society. While some stakeholders across the country view the police as simply doing their job, others have begun to call for reforms or even defunding the police. Communities and activists calling for reforms have pushed for ideas like the 8 Can't Wait campaign at the municipal level, which includes policies such as banning chokeholds, warning before shooting, and comprehensive incident reporting. Others have called for implementation of required body-worn cameras for police officers. This didn't reach national attention until Michael Brown's family called for police body cameras in 2014, after police officer Darren Wilson shot and killed Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Police unions question the efficacy of the cameras, while civil liberties advocates question how they might affect the rights of people who have.
They question the efficacy of motherfucking body-worn camera footage because we had a young lady in my master's program at Rochester Institute of Technology about a year or two ago. And she did her master's thesis on body-worn cameras by our local police department, Rochester Police. And she had found that, one, it's a hot mess with their body-worn camera, right? One, they have the ability, the autonomy to turn on and off their cameras, whether it's the audio or the video. So there still leaves room for error, right? There's stuff that there's no transparency there if you're turning off the video and the audio when you feel like it. You know what I'm saying? Then when it comes to the behind the scenes of like actually looking through all the body-worn camera footage to find, police doing some wrong, there's not enough funding and resources in that department, right? You got all these police with these cameras, and if they play them, you got all this footage and this data, but when it comes down to actually reading this data, coding this data and everything of that sort, they don't have the means to do that efficiently because of the fact that they're lacking resources. So it's crazy because here in Rochester, our police receives the highest funding of all services here, right? Our police were getting about $145 million a year in budgeting, which majority of their money went into their pay, increasing pay, their uniforms. Oh, most of it is pay because they get paid so much overtime, and it's crazy. It's incentivized. These niggas get paid more sitting and babysitting a parade than they do their regular, you know what I'm saying? So anyways, it's a lot to it. Even having body worn camera footage would be beneficial in the sense that you have access to what they see and hear. However, as long as the police has the ability to turn on and off the camera, no, because when they end up in certain situations where they should have that video footage on, that audio footage on, they could turn it off. So that's why you have people, complaining about the efficacy of body worn camera footage. It's just, there's so much leeway, there's so much room for error.
Of encounters with the police. People who have been calling for defunding the police argue that shrinking police budgets could open funds for other social service programs that might better fulfill the needs of people going through mental health crises, alcohol and drug-related incidents, and maybe even issues of interpersonal violence. Others argue that neither reforms nor defunding are enough, and argue instead for abolition. Some point to the unintended consequences that resulted from defunding the police in the 1970s, and others point to the history linking the institutions of policing to groups like slave patrols and their histories of racialized harassment and terror. Proponents of this third option have also pointed to recently available FBI reports, such as white supremacist infiltration of law enforcement published in 2006, and a leaked 2015 counterterrorism policy guide. This guide documented how white supremacist organizations have been attempting to infiltrate police departments by having members attempt to join as recruits or encouraging relationships between these organizations' members and individual officers. These activists look to past and present abolition movements against slavery and against prisons for inspiration. What the future holds for law enforcement in the United States is anyone's guess. Perhaps things will settle and nothing will change. But what the history of law enforcement points to is an ever-changing institution with a troubled, and for some, troubling past. Hey Originauts, this is just a reminder that you can become a member of our Patreon page, starting at...
All right, beautiful people. As I snack on my almonds, forgive me for motherfucking eating in the midst of that. I'm hungry, and I'm supposed to be going to the gym soon, but I hope you guys learned something from the video. Forgive me for pausing so much. It's just, I talk about this stuff all the time. Like I've mentioned earlier in this video, my entire educational background revolves around the criminal justice system. I got my associates, my bachelor's, and my master's degree on the criminal justice. I minored a little in psychology, but majority of my educational background revolves around criminal justice. I'm knowledgeable in other areas, but I will say the social realm is my expertise, especially how it ties into the criminal justice system. So that could be racial, whether it's homeless, immigrants, mental health, how it connects to the criminal justice system. That's what I know. So forgive me for pausing so much. It's just, there's so much information up here, but however, like I told you, these videos are just to kind of introduce you into these topics. I will be posting links so that way you guys can go to my other channel, The Antithetical Antagonist. This is the channel where I solely use this space for educational purposes, and I use it to go more in depth into certain topics that I don't really have the time for on my channel. So I hope you guys learned something. And, like, comment, share, subscribe, and motherfucking just get into your spaces, get into your communication, networking spaces, and talk about these different topics. Even if you know absolutely jack squat, just getting conversation started is enough, because at the end of the day, information will be transferred. You're bound to come across somebody that knows something. So some knowledgeable information will be shared. And we always we're always, susceptible for learning. So I love y'all. Peace. Make sure y'all, support Uncle Scoop with his his organization. This is his merch. I support Uncle Scoop, so that's why I bought it. But as you see, separate yourself. It's dope. He got shorts, all types of stuff. So I love y'all. Peace.